The world of Dead Space is a dark and twisted reality, from disturbing stories from survivors to corruption filling the decks of the government, all the way to the depraved practices of an overzealous religious cult. In this video, we'll be looking at what is, in my opinion, the most disturbing, scariest, and creepiest things in the franchise. Whether this is something to do with the many stories the series has to offer, moments within the lore and the games, or the grotesque transformations. So let's go through my next dreaded Dead Space 10. Starting off, we begin with the Dead Space Salvage comic, where as a result of the climactic end of the first game, the USG Ishimura had been catapulted into deep space, and its shock point drive had been malfunctioning, causing it to shock point all over the system, to the point a group known as the Magpies came into contact with it after it collides and destroys one of their storage ships, known as the Nest, which encourages them to enter the vessel to find anything they can salvage to make up for their loss, where they find the remnants of necromorph and human tissues, where the images are pretty graphic alone, but it becomes more disturbing when you realize that this is the end result of what once had been a person, either killed and turned into a necromorph or consumed by the corruption, adding to its mass, which makes it all the more horrifying to see, as these liquefied remains used to be people with their own lives, jobs, and experiences. And it's the knowledge of the origins to these sites that gets me, which is an instance of some things are better left unexplored. Unitology has always been deranged with their practices, but with the newest addition to the series, Dead Space Deep Cover, we come to understanding these practices or rituals in greater detail than before, which shows us how Unitology had been so deep-rooted within society and why it is so difficult to snap them out of their delusions, as soul cleansing is the practice of cauterizing certain blood vessels inside the brain in order to change a person's behavior, personality, and making them more susceptible to new information. As Unitology would say, leaving them without doubt. They do this by the use of a surgical rig that cuts through the tissue and bones so they can stick a cauterizing probe into the occipital lobe to burn away those vessels to ensure the person will be susceptible to their indoctrination methods and to further the work of the church. Which it should be noted that soul cleansing is a practice that is mandatory, which means that all initiates have to go through this process, or as they call it, a ritual, in order to progress through the ranks of the church, which is a truly terrifying aspect of Unitology, which makes the church even more sinister than before. In the beginning portion of Dead Space 2, as you traverse through Titan Station in the midst of a necromorph outbreak, you will see ships colliding with each other, defenseless civilians getting torn down by their reanimated friends, and being turned by infectors. But as you go inside the laundry room, you hear an unsettling noise that fills your ears. As you realize that in the chaos of this necromorph outbreak, a kid is stuck inside of one of the washers, which would be unsettling for anyone to hear passing through this area, especially those who are parents themselves. But with no indication of how this kid got trapped in their predicament, your mind is left to wonder how they ended up there. Did someone put them there and turn the machine on out of malice? Or were they influenced through a series of hallucinations? Or was the kid simply hiding from the necromorphs before it began its cleaning or drying cycle? Who knows? But what we do know is, it is certainly an eerie moment in the Dead Space games. In Dead Space 3, when traversing Tau Volantis for the first time, we come up to a way station within the cold and harsh environment in the search for a replacement suit, so Isaac and/or Carver can shield themselves from the danger outside. However, inside we find a new danger lurking within the shadows, the Feeders, who used to be soldiers of the Sovereign Colonies, where their origins aren't just distressing but tragic as well, as the soldiers had been put into a very awful situation, with their rations running dry. They began to starve. In a desperate struggle for sustenance, they weighed their options but came down to a decision that ultimately sealed their fate, as they began to consume the necromorph flesh in hopes it would sustain them. However, what it did was in fact the complete opposite, as the necrotized tissues that were consumed began to eat away at the soldiers from the inside out. As all necromorph tissues are recombinant, meaning it will consume dead cells and transform them into new ones. In this case, the recombinant DNA slowly broke down the cells of the soldiers' internal organs and turned the system against the host. Combining that with the influence of the many markers scattered across the planet, the soldiers slowly turned insane, and through their starvation they would seek out their fellow comrades so they could consume their flesh in the hopes to fuel the pit in their stomachs. This can be heard in Sam's audio log, where his fellow soldiers plead with him to let them in so they can eat him.
3 days I've been quiet, hiding in the dark. I have to get to the radio, call for help. I think there may be a way around them. By throwing small objects, I can trick them into investigating the noise.
Ackerman! Is that you?
Oh God.
I smell you! I smell... fresh meat!
Private Sam Ackerman. Is anyone left out there?
Sam, it's Dr. Serrano. Listen, you must make your way to Facility 1. Do you hear me? Lives depend on it.
Doc? Whose lives?
Everyone's! Just go, Sam! Go now!
I'll try, Doc. I'll try.
Over time, and without the necessary food needed to sustain them, the soldiers' bodies began to feast on themselves, resulting in the shriveled appearance of these creatures, where even in death they continue scrounging for food within the way station until Isaac discovers them. In the original Dead Space, players were introduced to the character Nicole Brennan with the context of her being Isaac Clarke's girlfriend, where it's clear that Isaac intends to find her aboard the derelict planet cracker ship, the USG Ishimura, that recently sent out a distress call after going dark while committing to an illegal planet cracking operation on Aegis 7. Throughout the game, players are led to think that Nicole had been somewhere on the ship, waiting for Isaac to come and rescue her, with her making appearances in certain levels of the game. Whether these moments had been through cryptic messages or audio transmissions pleading for help.
This is Senior Medical Officer Nicole Brennan transmitting ship-wide. We need more help. We don't have the resources to deal with this many cases. Nobody would tell us what's happening. These wounds, we are not equipped to deal with this. Get him to the table. Hold him. Nurse, you hold him down. Record.
Isaac, where are you? It's me, Nicole.
Isaac, make us whole again. Isaac, make us whole again.
Isaac, where are you? Help me.
Eventually, however, Isaac finds Nicole, where she helps him progress through a couple of the chapters, but in the final chapter, Isaac comes to terms with the fact that Nicole hadn't really been alive, but had died in the first week of the Necromorph outbreak, soon after sending him the video log you see in the opening cutscene, and these appearances had been the work of the marker, where it had been projecting her to him, so he would do its bidding. But the thing that gets me here is how the game had been warning you of this event throughout your experience, as if you take the first letter of each chapter and combine those letters together, they will spell out Nicole is dead, which is enough to make an already creepy experience even more eerie. And something that used to make me turn off the TV is the ending to the game, where it makes you think, finally, it's over, only for Nicole to return as a withered apparition. Which I personally think that this moment was done far better in the original than how it was treated in the remake, where the remake treats these moments as a fun, fair haunted house experience rather than focusing on giving the player one last scare for the road.
I wish I was just
Before I've spoken about what makes the horror in Dead Space Extraction so great, with the effects of the hallucinations on the characters, not that it just scares or messes with the perception of the players, but the reaction the characters give to these events. Where in the first chapter, we as the players believe the same as the character does, that these miners have gone crazy and are trying to kill us, and so we need to defend ourselves, only for the game to pull the rug out from under us at the end of the chapter by implying that these miners weren't really attacking us, but they were really trying to stop us from continuing our murderous rampage through the Megavents.
What? You're not.
Hostile is down. Repeat, hostile is down. Good shot, sir.
Shooting one of your own is never good. He's not even packing a gun.
You're shitting me. This is the guy that slaughtered his entire crew.
Why'd you do it, son? All these people never did anything to hurt you.
Lex.
In other moments, we get to see the effects of the marker on the minds of the protagonists, from the hallucinations getting worse and worse throughout the experience. But one that I think is quite possibly the best scary moment in Dead Space Extraction, hands down, is when you visit the morgue, where we are treated to a frightened McNeil. Which brings us back to reality, that we aren't playing as a set of badass characters like a Spartan or maybe even a Doomslayer that seemingly has no fear of the opposition, but we are playing as a normal group of people with their own fears and limits, which I think makes the experience more grounded and eerie. As if the character themselves is scared, that will in turn put the player on edge and make the sequence more effective. As normally, if someone sees a disturbing sight, they're gonna have more of a reaction to it, unlike how Isaac just acts like seeing a necromorph is old news. He's like, been there, done that, got the dementia, which is something I felt was lacking in Isaac's reactions in the second game. As even if you encountered a necromorph before, I think the way they move, sound, or even just the sight of them would still scare you, or at the very least would unsettle you, regardless of how many times you have encountered them. Nolan Stross had been an EarthGov scientist who had been stationed aboard the USG O'Bannon, which is the main ship shown in the animated film Dead Space Aftermath, where the characters travel back to Aegis 7 to try and find pieces of the marker. However, after conducting research and experiments on one of the located shards, Nolan had begun a new necromorph outbreak, and his mind had been infected by the mental blueprint. Once the outbreak had begun, Stross had evaded the necromorph pursuing him and had made it back to his family inside his private quarters, where instead of his baby boy and his wife, he finds more necromorphs, which he proceeds to kill them, just like how many of us would deal with a necromorph. But it turns out that these necromorphs had been projections deriving from the marker, and Stross had inadvertently murdered his wife and son. But what gets me about this scene isn't just the manipulation the marker shard has over Stross, but the muffled cries of his wife that really makes me feel unsettled by this scene. As from her point of view, Stross had just attacked their son seemingly for no reason, and all she was doing was trying to protect their son from the onslaught. And before Stross delivers the final blow to his wife, she utters out a muffled cry of, which is enough to make me feel the true horror of the marker, of how it so easily manipulates the minds of its victims to turn once reasonable people into deranged killers. As seen throughout the Dead Space media, the corruption is a mass of necrotized tissue that grows over the environment of the locations within a necromorph outbreak, acting as support to the necromorph horde by cutting off routes that would otherwise be used by survivors to escape the horrors of the outbreak. Despite the concern people have had with the corruption's abilities, the fear factor for me is how the corruption assimilates lifeforms into its mass and converts them into fresh necromorphs, or to grow its mass with the faces and body parts being visible in the necrotized flesh, which is most notable in the Dead Space backstory comics, where Newman had traveled to the comms array in hopes to contact the USG Ishimura floating above, only to find that the corruption has completely overtaken the location, where he can see Vera's face inside the corruption, where she has been completely assimilated and has fused with it, which the sight would be enough to make anyone run in fear. And the corruption can grow at a very fast rate, making removal very difficult, as when characters had attempted to burn the corruption away, it grew back, and covered even more of the location than it had done so before, making it a deadly force not to be taken lightly. The Necromorphs are indeed terrifying adversaries in Dead Space, with each one coming with their own set of abilities and purposes, but there is a more graphic element to them which comes in the form of sound, where in some instances through their moans and groans, it almost sounds coherent, meaning they come across like they are trying to speak to you. For example, you have the exploders that will make this sound, that sounds like they are trying to ask for help from you, and the Guardians who will make moans and whimpers, similar to how a person would. Which is very unsettling, that you could be walking through a corridor and see a shadow at the end of the hallway, hearing someone crying out for help, only for you to get a nasty surprise when you turn that corner, basically weaponizing empathy and sympathy. The reason I think that some of these necromorphs make these sounds is to lure more victims to their general location, as to play more into their overall role in an outbreak, which is to locate, kill, gather, and assimilate, so that the outbreak can progress and convergence can be finalized as a result. However, there is a theory that these specific necromorphs make these sounds or noises because the person they once had been is still conscious of their surroundings, but aren't in control of their actions, which I think is a bit far-fetched. However, if it was confirmed to be the case, then I think it would bring the Necromorphs a step closer to creatures like the Flood from the Halo franchise. But it would indeed add a new layer of horror to the already disturbed universe of Dead Space. But unfortunately, there isn't any deeper evidence to point to in order to make that connection in any of the media. One of the most terrifying aspects of Dead Space is seeing how the marker operates, where it is implied that the markers will use its gravitational abilities to reshape the terrain in order to instill change upon a species. In other words, creating an environment to force evolution to take root, practically helping a species to evolve indirectly, and ensuring that they will become the dominant species on the planet due to these steps in evolution. Once this happens, the marker will make its presence known through the use of its electromagnetic and gravitational abilities to create anomalies in the world, which would be detected by the target species, which would lead them back to the source of these issues. The marker can also communicate with people by using its signal to give people visions of events or past loved ones known as apparitions, or through whispers where these messages will come across as cryptic and mysterious, and these are specific to the person being affected, meaning only they can see or hear what the marker is telling or showing them.
Staring at me, Isaac. Stross.
Through the holes in his head.
Listen to me.
I would never. But son, Daddy's not a murderer.
Stross!
I would never hurt you.
He's not real.
Yes, he is. You can't see him because you haven't taken the steps.
The marker can also send these visions to people when they are sleeping, creating terrifying nightmares, which in turn stops people from sleeping, which can affect the way the person functions, behaves, and perceives new information. The marker can also give on to those within its array of influence a self-replicating signal, known as the mental blueprint, that gives on to those who understand it, the ability to create more marker copies, allowing for this virus to spread across the galaxy, where those who have the mental blueprint will begin seeing symbols more frequently, and they can also translate what these symbols mean. Inadvertently, the person can also use this to their advantage to destroy the markers if they so choose to. However, those who are affected by this will develop a case of dementia, and most will be driven mad from these symptoms, which can turn a once peaceful, friendly, and optimistic person into a violent, homicidal homicidal maniac, which creates the beginning of a downfall for a species where they begin to turn on themselves, murdering each other, or even ending their own lives, which gives the marker fresh corpses to use for a necromorph outbreak, beginning the marker's true purpose to consume the species it has been preparing, basically farming and assimilating them. The marker begins a necromorph outbreak by taking any biomass and changing it at the cellular level, twisting and fusing body parts together to create horrific and misshapen forms that will hunt down any life form to give the marker more biomass, whether this means giving it more materials to create more necromorph forms, or materials to create the corruption found in these outbreaks. And once a certain amount of bodies and biomass has been collected, along with consuming those who created this specific marker, the necromorphs will be influenced to encircle it, so that convergence can commence, where through the use of its gravitational abilities, the marker levitates and pulls the necromorphs into the air, along with the planet's terrain to form the outbreak's final transformation, fusing the necrotic tissue, terrain, and itself to create a brethren moon, which the moon possesses all of the marker's abilities and heightens them, so instead of having a limited array of influence, the moon's array almost seems limitless, with them being able to influence those from across the universe. Personally, it's not really the conclusion of an outbreak that gets me, it's the slow, methodical pulling back the layers of a person's mind, slowly driving them mad and breaking down society, that I find to be the most disturbing element in how a marker will set the stage for an outbreak to begin, as this would ensure the faction or species will be divided, and through this division will be easier to consume, as the species would stand a better chance if they had worked together, rather than splitting off. And that is it for this list. Let me know what made you feel disturbed, scared, or distressed when traversing this twisted universe. And if you have a list of your own, make sure to inscribe it within the comments down below. And remember to subscribe to the channel for more videos going over the histories, lore, story, and video essays. And be sure to hit that join button to become a member today, as this will ensure that you receive exclusive benefits to enhance your experience. And I hope to see you all in the next video, but for now, be sure to leave having a good one.